Hey guys, welcome to the second section of our Greek civilization unit. So where we left off, we were looking at the different philosophers who had a really large impact on Greece, and still a lot of their ideas we still use today in our country, specifically like what Aristotle looked at with his government and so on. Today what we're going to look at is really the history side, the science, the medicine, and most possibly how Macedonia, with the area of Philip II and Alexander the Great, kind of sweep in and take over all of Greece. Okay, so if we look at the start of history, so we look at history and we think, well, history's always been there. You know, everybody always talks about history, all right? But if we think about ancient Greece, and we talked about this before, all right, a lot of people believed at this time that all those legends and the epics that Homer wrote and the different myths about Zeus and Athena and Poseidon, all of that were true. So everything that we know that probably wouldn't happen, they all believed that was accurate history. So people didn't look at an event and try to figure out why it happened or what it caused. So there was no analyzing of the past to figure out how it may have impacted the future. Okay, so the start of history really starts with a guy whose name is Herodotus. Herodotus was a man who wrote a history about the Persian Wars. So we know the Persian Wars were a long section of Greek history when the large area of Persia attempted to take over to get revenge and so on. Okay, so Herodotus, what he's going to do is write about the Persian Wars, but he's still put in the influence of the gods, okay, into his story. Now we know that history comes not because the gods are upset and so forth, but Herodotus still writes in this fashion. Okay, but he did try to separate like fact from fiction, what's not real and what is real. So he did attempt to do that. Okay, so he did act like a news reporter to a sense, because he questioned people about what happened. He tried to get facts and verify sources and so on. Since he's like the first guy to actually start this process, Herodotus is known as the father of history because of the research that he put into all of his events. Now, Herodotus is on our tests, okay, but one way to remember it is that he's the father of history. History Herodotus. We got those double H's going on. Okay, so as time goes on, another Greek historian is going to come along, and his name is Thucydides. So Thucydides, what he was in his younger life, he was a general in the Peloponnesian War. So if we remember the Peloponnesian War, it was the war between Athens and Sparta. So he figured that this war was one of the greatest events in Greek history, so he wrote the book, The History of the Peloponnesian War. Okay, the one thing that Thucydides did that really looks a lot like modern historians is that he rejected this idea that the gods influence anything. So the gods aren't upset and so on and casting wrath and causing war and so on. All right, he rejected that, and he's simply going to write about the event as it happened. Okay, so what he's going to do, he's going to set out to make people believe history. These are the events that happened, this is how it happened, and this is what it caused. Okay, so he tried to be practical, he was impartial, he didn't take one side over the other, he interviewed people from both sides, and he's going to report on the event. He's not going to report on his opinion, he's going to report upon the facts. So he really acts like the modern news reporter because he's going to go to the battle sites, he interviewed people that were there, not just people that heard things, okay, but eyewitness accounts and so on. Okay, so what he did, he's going to really start this process of looking at history, how it happened, what occurred during the event, and what is it going to cause in the future. Okay, so he really analyzes this cause and effect. Because of this, this happened, which caused this next thing to happen, which is really what we do in history today. Okay, so what he did, he reported on history, he wrote this book, but he left behind like his documents, his commentary, so other people could also learn from the event. Now, other than history really starting, science really gets the start in ancient Greece. So if we think about science and the stuff you learn with Mr. Lammermeyer and Mr. Klein, okay, really all that started in ancient Greece. So Greece was really the first area that's really going to question things and try to figure out the whys. Okay, so if we look at Greece up until this time again, they believe that the gods controlled everything. So remember, people believe that gods controlled their lives, okay? If we look at events, we believe that gods controlled the events and the battles and so forth. And even science, anything that happened in nature was based on the gods. Okay, and then people started to come along and realize that maybe this isn't so. Maybe the gods aren't causing these things to happen. Maybe we should observe and find evidence and experiment and see if there's a different cause. So one of the first scientists, whose name is Thales, he studied astronomy and he also studied math. Now at this time they didn't have telescope, but he did make a lot of observations, like how the sky moved and so on, to record these items. So this is a really long process, okay, but definitely beneficial. Another guy, his name is Pythagoras. So in math this year, you might learn of the Pythagorean theorem. This was a math formula that was invented in ancient Greece. It was important in ancient Greece, and we still use it today. Okay, he taught that the universe followed the same laws that govern numbers and so on. That these formulas we could write down and figure things out. Okay, that it wasn't all the gods and so forth controlling everything in our life, but rather there was a lot of science behind it. Okay, so Pythagoras is a really big guy in math, and we still use his math today. Most normally, like we just mentioned, was the Pythagorean theorem, and that's used to discover the length of a triangle, that there's a formula for that, and so on. Okay, and now we mentioned this in class the other day, that medicine also kind of started in ancient Greece. Remember, up until this time, excuse me, people fully believed that gods, okay, gave people like diseases and illnesses because they were doing bad things. Okay, then a guy comes along whose name is Hippocrates. He's known as the father of medicine because he's really the guy that gets this started. Okay, so if we look at him, okay, what he's going to do is really question this belief that God is casting their wrath to make people ill. Like we mentioned in class, this person has the flu. It's not because they did anything wrong. It's probably because their neighbor had the flu, and now they have the flu, and the next neighbor will get the flu. Okay, so he's going to really start this process off, and he's going to identify that, there are things that are contagious. There are illnesses that we get, but we can treat them with using medicine. So Hippocrates was really the first doctor, and he's going to travel throughout Greece healing the sick. Okay, so he's going to use a diagnosis to treat sick people, and he's going to figure out medicines to help them. He also created a list of rules that doctors had to follow. So we mentioned in class, at least most classes, that there's something in the United States today called the Hippocratic Oath that we call like the HIPAA law. The HIPAA law maintains that privacy between patient and doctor. So like even myself cannot act and ask questions about like my husband's prognosis without my husband being there. Okay, so he created this list of rules that helped the patient go back and forth between the doctor and the Sorry about that. My husband and my mom walked in on that video. But we were talking about Hippocrates, and what he came up with was something called the Hippocratic Oath. And it's going to take all those conversations between the doctor and the patient and make them completely private. So in today's world, like if I call the clinic and I say and ask to hear about my husband's appointment, okay, they won't give that information to me because of something called the HIPAA law. I can't get it even though I'm his wife. Okay, that started with ancient Greece when they talked about the Hippocratic Oath. So if Hippocrates went and he diagnosed somebody with a disease, let's say, all right, he can't go out and then tell everybody, like Betty has this disease, stay away from her. He made that all private. Okay, and that would help just this doctor-patient privacy. It helped people get better and so forth. Okay, so if we look at medicine, it really gets its start in ancient Greece, and we still use this all around the world today. Now, as we look at Greece, now we talked about this at the end of our last unit, we know that Greece was in war with Persia. Then we know that Greece was in war with itself, and then we know that Macedonia came in and swept. Okay, so we're kind of traveling back in time a little bit to say, well, how did that happen? How did Greece fall? Okay, so if we look at this time, we know that Greece is, like at its peak. It's the golden age. It's at the peak of everything at this time. But we also know that after the Peloponnesian War, after the war between Athens and Sparta, these city-states were very divided and very weak. They couldn't come up, with a system that worked for all city-states. Okay, we said there was a lot of fighting and so on. And we also said that when an area is like that and they're all consumed in their own conflict, they're also not watching the borders around them. So we said that the area to the north of them, Macedonia, is going to be watching this, and they're going to realize that this is going to be their prime opportunity. Okay, so Macedonia, as they're growing in strength, okay, they get this idea that they could sweep in and unite these city-states together under one ruler. Okay, their goal then is to prevent other areas from coming in. Okay, so if we look a little bit at Macedonia, it's just an area of farmers, very similar to Sparta at this time. King Philip II was really the guy that made Macedonia great. So we looked at Cyrus the Great. In Persia, kind of the same idea. So in Macedonia, we had King Philip II. Okay, so King Philip II really admired Greece, and actually everybody admired Greece at this time because of all the discoveries that they made. People looked at Athens as to like this educational world. Okay, so a lot of people admired him. So King Philip II's like, well, they can't get along. They can't come up with an idea to unify the city-states. Maybe I can unify the states. Maybe if I come in and then decide to rule everybody, Greece will be great and we'll keep Greece great under my rule. So what he decided to do, he's going to go one city-state by another and he's going to take them over one at a time. Okay, because remember, they are not united. They couldn't come together and fight off Philip II. So he goes one by one and he's going to take them over. Now, he either battled with them or he's going to bribe them. Okay, so he's going to bribe them with different things. And if they disagree, he would just go in and take them over anyways. On the last battle, okay, it was between Athens and Thebes versus Philip II. Okay, that was the last battle. And once they took Athens, he ruled all of Greece. So now as we look at King Philip II, what does he do next? And that next one is actually going to come in our next video. So I guess I'll see you in the following.